I want to ask you a question from Cherries. May you ask Vijay if how the U.S. tries to leverage this conflict to strategically contain China? Also curious about the realignment of Venezuela and Philippines back towards the U.S.
So, firstly, the United States has made a number of policy decisions which have really damaged Europe. Europe had three avenues to get energy: Iran, Russia, and Libya. Hello, hello. The United States, on behalf of Israel, basically brought Iran offline for Europe. This whole nuclear thing. I mean, it was a manufactured, crisis with Iran. Okay, Iran is gone. Then you have this devastating war in Libya, where Libyan oil production collapses. So now Europe has no access to these two venues of getting energy by pipeline, actually, in fact. But Libya, it's a boat ride, but it's just a short ride. For oil, it's short. For humans, it's a very long journey. The third was the pipeline of natural gas and oil coming through Ukraine from Russia, and then the Nord Stream 1 and 2, which went across the Baltic Sea. The United States fought to get those offline. So now imagine Europe, the three major sources of energy gone immediately. So now the United States, having in the middle of this accelerated conflict, where the US was one of the people who engineered this conflict. It's not just, out of the Kremlin. This is a conflict engineered by many people, by the United States, NATO, and so on. And of course, Mr. Putin and the Kremlin. All of them are parties to this conflict. Ukraine is just the carpet upon which this is happening. It's not I don't think you can say Ukraine is the one that brought forth the conflict. They were also utilized in a sense. I hate to say this about people in a sovereign country, but my God, let's be also a little honest here. Okay, all of that. And then the United States scrambling now to get Europe energy supplies. Because listen, this is not just about heating the houses in Europe. 40% of the world's wheat comes from Ukraine and Russia. Most of Europe's energy comes from Russia now, including the gas that is used in production of fertilizer. That means Europe is going to have a food security problem. So to fix all this, the United States now has gone to the United Arab Emirates and other countries and said, okay, let's get your gas to Europe, but through liquefied natural gas. That's going to take a year to do because you have to convert the terminals in Hamburg and so on. It's not an easy thing to do. They also went to Venezuela and said, let's bring your oil back in line. Let's do that. Let's do this. Let's recover from other places which we had previously squeezed. Now, interesting. This is not going to happen easily. So in Antalya, there was a diplomatic conference where Felix Plasencia, the foreign minister of Venezuela, met Sergei Lavrov, and they basically said, look, we're on the same side here. That was interesting. At the same time, Mr. Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, made it clear to the Americans, I'm happy to talk about lessening sanctions. And I think that's a very good approach. What the Venezuelans are saying is, let's have both. Lessen sanctions, sell oil, but we are with the Russians on this. And, deal with it, Washington. And I think Washington may have to deal with it, Katie. That's interesting. Finally, Venezuela has some leverage now in this conversation and debate. But Washington is scrambling because the contradictions of this war are now, being felt. And what's incredible, once again, there's, what about game theory? Didn't they sit in some office in the CIA or in the National Security Agency and they game this out and think, well, what are we going to do? As it is, there's COVID inflation. Let's try to prevent this conflict in Ukraine. They did nothing to prevent it. They basically accelerated the conflict. Some people say the Russians walked into a trap. I think that's a stupid assessment. I think everybody, sleepwalked into this. And this should not have happened. There were lots of possible exits, In fact, it's interesting. The Duma in Russia put forward a bill actually initiated by the communists in the Duma, calling for support of Lugansk and Donetsk when they seceded. Initially, Putin was, I don't want any part of this. I don't want to inherit, because this is going to mean a military intervention, but he then went ahead with it. But another issue in play here, and why the fighting in Mariupol is so significant, another issue here, which again, once again, the Russians they didn't produce any discussion about this, or much discussion. In 2014, why did Russia intervene so, ferociously into Crimea? Not because 90% of the people later voted to join Russia. No. In 2014, they intervened in Crimea. In 2015, September, they intervened in Syria. Why? These two interventions are linked.
Water.
Because Russia has only two warm water ports. Russian Navy relies on the port of Sebastopol in Crimea and Latakia, Tartus in Syria. And that's why they intervened, because they were in danger of losing the Russian Navy for most of the year. When they brought Crimea into Russia, the Ukrainian government of Petro Poroshenko cut off water supplies to Crimea. So the people of Crimea were basically facing collective punishment. This is illegal as far as the Geneva Conventions are concerned. So Russia had to actually send, Crimea is connected to Russia by a bridge. So Russia had to send trucks of water across this bridge to bring water to Crimea. One of the first things they did recently is they restarted the water. What I believe is that the Russians are fighting to create a land bridge from the Russian border through Mariupol to Crimea. And I don't think they're going to let that go, even when the negotiations come. Or they may let that go, but they're going to take guarantees that water supply to Crimea is not going to be held up. By the way, this is a quid pro quo. The Russians aren't innocent in this, because by building Nord Stream 2, the Russians are also going around Ukraine, not having the natural gas go through Ukraine, which means Ukraine wouldn't be able to collect fees for the natural gas. So Ukraine retaliates, and I don't know who retaliated what, okay? But there's no innocence in this. These are two governments that played hardball. But there could have been a walk down, and there wasn't. And the catastrophe is going to be felt globally, because we are all going to suffer all over the world, particularly the poor are going to suffer inflation. And 40% of the world's wheat comes from Russia and Ukraine. The inflation is going to be very high.